It was late, the bus was nearly empty, the streets were cold and so was the silence. That's when she saw him, an old man worn down by more than just the winter. What secret could this quiet act reveal? He didn't speak, he didn't ask, but something in her heart told her this ride mattered, so she let him on. No questions, no fare, just a quiet seat in the back. Weeks later, without warning, the transit office called her in, not to reprimand her, but to offer her an opportunity she never saw coming. What twist would change her life forever? She didn't expect anything in return, but life has a way of circling back when you least expect it. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. Angela White didn't mind the night shift, in fact, she preferred it. Most drivers at the Chicago Transit Authority avoided the late routes, too quiet, too dark, too far out into the west side after the lights of downtown faded behind rearview mirrors. But Angela liked the quiet. She liked the way the city softened after 10 p.m., how the sirens dulled, how the shadows stretched longer over cracked sidewalks, how time slowed between one stop and the next. At 37, she had long stopped chasing noise. She lived alone in a modest walk-up just past Pulaski and Madison. No kids, no husband, no social media. Her phone never rang unless it was CTA dispatch or the occasional robocall about car insurance she didn't need. The neighbors didn't know her name. She didn't mind. Every night she reported in just before 9 p.m., nodded at dispatch, pulled her route log, and eased behind the wheel of bus number 872, line 18 loop to west. Her route, by 11:12 p.m., she'd be passing Jefferson Avenue, the last real stop before the outer blocks turned quiet, too quiet until the turnaround point. It was always cold at that stop. Tonight, it was colder than usual, the kind of cold that crept into your boots, even with 2 layers of socks, the kind of cold that made the windows fog over no matter how long the defrosters ran. Angela leaned forward in her seat, eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. Her passengers were few, just 3 tonight, a young woman in hospital scrubs fast asleep with her head against the window, a teenage boy hunched in a hoodie, earbuds in, nodding to music only he could hear, and an older man in a security guard jacket sipping coffee from a styrofoam cup. All quiet, all tucked into their own little corners. Angela glanced at the clock, 11:14 p.m. She slowed the bus at Jefferson, blinkers flashing in the blue-lit darkness. At first, she didn't see him, but then the shape moved. Just outside the glow of the street lamp, a figure emerged. He stepped from behind the covered shelter like a shadow separating from the wall. Tall, stooped, dressed in layers of tattered winter clothing. His coat, old army green, oversized and frayed at the cuffs, looked like it had survived more winters than most men could count. His pants were stained with road dust, his boots were mismatched, one with duct tape around the heel. But it was his face that Angela noticed first, hollow, lined deep like grooves carved by something older than time. His eyes didn't seem to focus, not on her, not on the bus, not on the city around him, just somewhere else. The man stepped up onto the bus with the slow, practiced motion of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. He said nothing. Angela didn't ask, she simply nodded once and pressed the button to release the doors. He didn't pay the fare, she didn't care. He moved down the aisle in silence. Passengers glanced at him, then looked away quickly. The teenage boy shifted uneasily in his seat. The man walked all the way to the back seat and lowered himself slowly, like his bones didn't quite believe in bending anymore. Angela closed the doors, the bus rolled forward. No one spoke, but a strange tension settled in the space behind her. Not danger, not fear, something else, something colder than the air outside. She checked the mirror. He was sitting perfectly still, shoulders hunched, arms pulled tight against his chest, his breath fogged faintly in the window beside him. From time to time, his lips moved, just barely, words unspoken, unfinished. Maybe memories. Angela drove on and the hospital worker stirred, blinked at the old man in the mirror, then looked away. The boy in the hoodie gave her a look that kind of looked like he was waiting for her to do something, say something. She didn't. Instead, as a light turned red near Kedzie, she reached to the side panel by her seat, opened the small storage hatch beneath the dash. Inside was an old steel thermos. She carried it every shift, never told anyone why, unscrewing the lid with practiced fingers. Angela poured the hot chamomile tea into a paper cup. Steam rose gently into the cabin air, a small act of warmth in a bus full of cold silence. At the next stoplight, she stood briefly and walked halfway down the aisle. She didn't say a word, she didn't ask permission. She simply placed the paper cup on the empty seat in front of him and walked back to the driver's chair. The bus moved again. Behind her, she heard nothing. No thank you, no sip, just the hum of the engine and the soft chatter of air vents blowing warm against frosted glass. 5 minutes passed, then 10. At the next mirror check, she caught him looking at the cup, still unmoving, still silent, but looking. That was enough. At 11:38 p.m., they reached the turnaround point, the last stop before the loop reset. Angela flicked the interior lights brighter, then made the usual call. Last stop, this bus returns eastbound. The hospital worker stepped off first, rubbing her eyes. The boy followed, glancing once more toward the back, then Hurrying down the steps, only the old man remained. He hadn't moved. Angela waited 1 minute, till she finally stood, walked back toward the rear of the bus. "Sir," she said gently. He didn't answer, just kept staring at the opposite window where nothing but frost and fog waited outside. Angela tilted her head slightly. "I'm turning around now. You can ride back if you need to, or I can call someone." Still no answer. But just as she turned to walk back, he whispered, soft, cracked, like a leaf crumbling in the wind, to stay low. "They're watching from the ridge." Angela froze, not fear, just sadness. His eyes weren't in the present, not in this city, not in this bus. They were somewhere else, maybe another country, another time, another war. She stepped closer, kneeling beside the seat, her voice low. "You're safe here, sir. No ridges, just my bus, just us." He blinked once, then turned toward her. For the first time, his eyes met hers, blue, clouded by age, but something flickered there, recognition maybe, or just the faint echo of being seen. Angela nodded, slow and calm. "Take your time," and she walked back to the front. She waited, and after a long moment, the old man stood. He shuffled forward slower than before and without a word stepped off the bus into the cold. Angela watched him disappear into the shadowed street. She waited until he was fully gone, then closed the doors. That night, as she drove the bus back toward downtown, the cup sat untouched on seat 20, still warm, still full, but not forgotten. Angela didn't speak of it to dispatch, didn't file a report, didn't even mention it in the logbook. But something lingered in the back of that bus, not a ghost, not a man, just a silence that felt meaningful. At 12:07 a.m., Angela parked bus number 872 in Bay 6. She shut down the systems, did her walkthrough, checked the seat cushions, and locked the fare box. Seat 21 was empty, but she paused beside it anyway. She picked up the untouched paper cup, carried it to the front, and poured the tea down. The street grate behind the depot, steam curled into the night air, soft, faint, vanishing, but somehow sacred. She didn't know his name, didn't know where he came from or where he went next, but that didn't matter, not to Angela, because something told her deep in the stillness of that last stop that the back of the bus wasn't just a seat that night, it was a memory, a refuge, a battlefield retreat, and she had offered peace without question, without judgment, just one cup of tea and a place to breathe. He came back 4 nights later to the same stop. The wind was sharper that evening, biting through the cracks in the bus doors. Snow had started dusting the curb just enough to make the sidewalks whisper underfoot. Angela pulled up to the Jefferson shelter, blinkers flashing, eyes scanning the shadows without meaning to, and there he was again, not standing this time, sitting, bent over, arms folded tight, coat pulled up around his neck like a shield, his breath fogged in slow, uneven bursts, as if even exhaling took too much effort. He didn't look up when she opened the door, didn't speak, just stepped on slowly, boots scraping against the metal floor. Angela didn't ask anything, she didn't need to. He moved to the back like before, sat down in seat 21. That seat had a window that never quite defogged, the heater vent didn't reach it well. It was the coldest place on the bus and somehow the quietest. She watched him for a second in the mirror, then focused on the road. Tonight, there were more passengers, a pair of college kids whispering about midterms, a nurse from County General dozing off near the front, a man in a trench coat scrolling through his phone with that glazed late-night look. No one noticed the man in the back except Angela. She could tell by the way he sat that something was different tonight. He rocked slightly, almost imperceptibly, like his body was trying to calm itself without permission. His hand tapped rhythmically against his knee, a beat, a habit that wouldn't die. He didn't look around, he didn't engage, but he wasn't fully here. She'd seen it before years ago, in her father. Angela's dad had returned from Iraq in the fall of 2005, a staff sergeant with a proud jawline and a silver ring tan on his left hand from wearing a wedding band too tight for too long. He didn't bring stories home. He brought silence and tremors and a haunted way of staring through walls like they still held echoes from another world. He loved her, Angela knew that, but he didn't sleep, not for more than an hour at a time. He'd pace the hall at 2 a.m., turn the porch light on and off, sit at the kitchen table in the dark, listening to static on an old AM radio. He never said why. Angela never asked. When she was 17, she found him sitting on the back steps in winter snow, clinging to his shoulders, whispering a name she didn't recognize. He had died of a stroke 3 years later. The coroner called it sudden, Angela called it slow. Now as she drove past Western Avenue, her eyes flickered back to the mirror. Seat 21, he was trembling again, lips moving, mouth forming names she couldn't hear. She slowed the bus gently at the next light, fingers tightening around the steering wheel. A sudden jolt came next, not from the road, from the back of the bus. A loud thump. Angela's eyes shot up. The old man had slammed his palm against the side window hard. Passengers turned, alarm. What the hell? One of the college kids muttered. Angela pulled over near the curb, flipped on the hazard lights, and stood slowly. She walked toward the back. The man was now standing, hunched over, eyes wide, staring into the darkness outside the foggy glass. He shouted suddenly, down. Get your heads down. His voice booming, deep, full of a command that had once carried weight. The college kids shrank in their seats. The nurse clutched her purse tighter. Angela moved quickly but calmly, walking down the aisle like she had hundreds of times. She reached him, Voice low, sir, she said. Hand raised gently. You're safe, this isn't a battlefield. He didn't hear her, or maybe he did. But he couldn't process it. He shouted again, they're crossing the ridge, we have to flank them. Angela stepped closer. Hey, she said softer now, placing one hand gently on his shoulder. His coat was cold, damp, he smelled faintly of earth and smoke and something older. Sir, she said again firmly, but with care, this is a city bus, not a war zone. He turned toward her slowly, eyes blinking fast, confusion dawning like headlights through fog, his mouth opened slightly, closed again, then finally, like he'd just come back from some far-off place, he looked at her. Really looked. Angela nodded once. It's okay. For a moment everything was still. Then, as if a string had been cut, the man's shoulders slumped. He sat down again slowly, hands shaking, eyes staring at the floor. The bus was silent behind them. Angela looked toward the mirror. I'm going to stop here for a moment, she said aloud to the passengers, her voice steady. We'll be moving again shortly. No one responded. But no one protested. She sat down beside the old man just for a minute. They didn't talk. She didn't need to say anything, neither did he. They just breathed together in silence. She let him off 2 stops later, helped him down gently, watched him shuffle across the sidewalk, and disappear between the buildings like a ghost returning to whatever corner he called home. He never gave a name, she never asked, but when she returned to the depot that night, she sat in her car for almost 20 minutes staring at nothing, thinking about her father's boots, sitting untouched in her closet, thinking about a man who still fought wars long after they ended. Thinking about how sometimes Seat 21 wasn't just a seat, it was a shelter, a battlefield, a memory. After that night, he didn't come back for a while. A week passed, then too. Angela found herself checking the Jefferson stop more often than usual. She started pouring a second cup of tea again, just in case. She left it on seat 20, and each night as she drove the bus down the dim-lit streets of Chicago's West End, she glanced in the mirror and found it empty, but never forgot. Then a Monday night just past 11:10, she saw him again, standing this time, no hat, just the old army coat now patched with a strip of black duct tape across the elbow. His eyes met hers as he stepped on. Just for a second, Angela offered a nod. No words were exchanged. He moved to the back of the bus, seat 21 this time. He held something in his hands, a small object. Angela couldn't make it out in the mirror, but he kept it close to his chest like it mattered. As the bus moved forward, she glanced again. He was whispering just like before, only this time he was smiling, a faint trembling smile. Angela didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, but when she passed a pothole near Pulaski and the bus bounced, the object slipped from his hand and rolled under the seat at the end of the line. When everyone else had gotten off and the old man had stood to leave, Angela walked to the back. He was already gone, but beneath seat 21, she found it, a brass dog tag, bent, scratched edges worn smooth from decades of being held too tight. No chain, just the tag, one name, one number, one branch, U.S. Army. Angela didn't pocket it, she didn't turn it in, she placed it on the dash the next night and left it there. The man didn't return again, not the next night, not the next week, but every night. Angela poured that second cup of tea, set it down on seat 20, and glanced at the dog tag as she pulled out of the depot, because sometimes you don't need a name to remember someone, sometimes a seat is all it takes, a seat, a silence, a place to be broken without fear of being thrown out. And Angela White had decided a long time ago, no one gets left behind on her bus, not if she can help it. Not if she can keep seat 21 open just a little while longer. Angela wasn't expecting a call from the office that morning. She'd barely stepped off the night shift when her work phone buzzed. A short message from dispatch: report to Route Division HQ at 10 a.m. sharp, office 204, bring your badge. No details, no explanation, just that. Her heart sank. She didn't need to guess. Someone must have filed a complaint. The man in seat 21, maybe that night he'd shouted, maybe the whispering, maybe the trembling hands. Someone must have seen something, misunderstood something, and now she'd be called in to explain. Angela sat in her car in the depot parking lot, clutching her badge in one hand and a lukewarm gas station coffee in the other. She stared through the windshield, heart thumping harder than it should have. It wasn't fear, it was shame. Even if she had to explain, she didn't regret it, not a second, not one cup of tea, not one look the other way, not one slow breath beside an old man lost in memory. Still, she braced herself. At 9:59, she walked through the tinted glass doors of the CTA regional office, climbed the 2 flights of stairs, and stepped into office 204. What she expected to see was a supervisor, maybe someone from HR, clipboard, a concerned expression. What she saw instead was flowers, not fancy ones, just a small bouquet in a chipped glass jar sitting on the front desk, a splash of color in a space that never had any. And behind that desk, the division manager, Mr. Collins, was smiling too warmly. Angela White, he said, rising and shaking her hand like they'd known each other longer than 4 years of route logs and shift calendars. Please have a seat. She did. Rigid, alert. Collins leaned forward. I'll get right to it. You've been recommended for reassignment. Angela blinked. Reassignment? He nodded. Effective immediately. You're being promoted to route lead for Division 4, you'll oversee scheduling, incident response, and senior driver training for lines 16 through 22. She stared at him, too stunned to speak. Then came the second blow. There's also a financial recognition, a one-time discretionary bonus, $15,000. Angela's lips parted, but no sound came out. Collins smiled again, kindly, this time. "I know, bit of a shock," she managed to whisper. "I wasn't aware I was even in consideration." Collins leaned back. "Well, until last week, neither were we. The board got a visit. A quiet investor, anonymous, requested access to legacy records, made some very generous moves." He paused, then requested you by name. Angela frowned. "Who?" Collins gave a small shrug. "They wouldn't say, just left a message. She's the only one keeping the line human." Angela blinked slowly. "The old man, C21, it had to be. But how? Why?" None of this made sense. She nodded stiffly, barely registering the rest of the conversation. Forms, signatures, start dates. She walked out of the office with her bonus confirmation in one pocket and a heart full of questions. That night, she reported to her usual shift for what would be her final drive before taking on the supervisor role. She arrived early. Bus number 872 was already humming in Bay 6, waiting like it always did. Angela sat behind the wheel for a moment, just breathing, then on instinct, she walked to the back toward seat 21. That was when she saw it, a large manila envelope resting on the faded cushion. No name, no label, just the weight of it. She picked it up, hands trembling slightly, slid a finger under the flap. Inside was a folded sheaf of yellow documents. She carried them to the front, sat down behind the wheel, and began to read. The first page was stamped with a city seal dated 1957, Chicago Department of Transit route charter proposal. Angela's eyebrows furrowed. The next page was a map, hand-drawn in pencil, edges curling with time, the original draft of Route 18 connecting downtown to the western edge before expansion swallowed neighborhoods and redrew every line. The next, a personnel roster from the same year, and at the bottom, a signature, Martin R. Whitmore. Angela blinked hard, then saw the final item, a letter, handwritten, uneven, a little shaky. "Angela, forgive the silence. Some men take longer to come home than others. I was there when this line was laid out. Every mile, every stop. I walked the curbs before the rails. I knew the corner boys by name. I knew which stoops the mothers sat on while waiting for the 6:15. I built Route 18 in a time when no one thought the west side mattered. We proved them wrong. But then came war, came loss, came ghosts that followed me further than any map could go. Some nights I walked not to remember but to keep from forgetting completely. And on one of those nights I met you. You didn't look away, you didn't flinch, you didn't pretend I was invisible. You offered warmth when I couldn't feel my hands and silence when I couldn't handle words. You didn't ask, but I'll answer anyway. I never stopped loving this route. I only stopped believing anyone else could. Thank you for proving me wrong. Seat 21 belongs to the people again. Yours, Mr. Whitmore." Angela sat there a long time after that, hands trembling, eyes blurring. The man who had trembled and whispered and shouted in fear had once laid the foundation of the very system she now worked in. He had drawn the route she drove, fought the wars her father never talked about, and he had chosen her to carry it forward. She thought of the dog tag still resting in the tray beneath her dash, of the untouched cup of tea from weeks ago, of every passenger who walked past seat 21 and never knew who once sat there. Angela folded the letter carefully, pressed it against her chest, and wept. She didn't tell anyone at the depot, she didn't post it online, didn't share it in the company newsletter. It wasn't about recognition, it never had been. It was about legacy, and legacy didn't shout, it sat quietly in the back. A week later, Angela started her new role. Her name went up on the door outside the Division 4 supervisor office. People congratulated her, brought donuts, shook her hand, and every night before she left the office, she walked down to Bay 6, found bus number 872, opened the rear doors, and left a paper cup of tea on seat 20 just in case, because some men come home in fragments, and all they need is a place to land, even if it's just the back of a city bus. Angela had never been much of a researcher. She wasn't the kind of person to dig through public archives or trace old property records, but something about that letter, the penciled map, the name at the bottom, Martin R. Whitmore, it stayed with her. It followed her home like dust on her coat, settling in the corners of her mind, whispering through late-night thoughts. So on a quiet Sunday morning, coffee in hand, she sat at her kitchen table and opened her laptop. She typed the name into a search bar and hit return and waited. There wasn't much at first, a few grainy photos from the late 50s, a man in a transit uniform standing beside a wooden frame city bus with the route number 18 painted in black across the front. Broad shoulders, smiling faintly, a clipboard tucked under one arm. But then she found the article, published in 1986, a small column buried in the archives of the Chicago Tribune. Man behind Route 18, the builder who disappeared, Martin R. Whitmore, the original architect of Route 18, vanished from public records nearly 3 decades ago after a tragic accident claimed the life of his wife, Eileen Whitmore, at the very bus stop he personally designed and fought to keep operational. Angela leaned Closer, the article continued, she was struck by a car while crossing the street at Jefferson and Monroe. Witnesses say Mr. Whitmore had been behind the wheel that night covering a shift when another driver called out sick. It was her birthday, he was taking her home. Angela stared at the words long and hard, then sat back in her chair, closed her eyes, and breathed. It made sense now, that Jefferson stop, seat 21, the man who came back again and again, not for warmth, not for shelter, but for memory. For penance, for something lost so long ago, the city forgot, but he hadn't, not for 1 minute. Angela clicked through the rest of the article. After the accident, Whitmore retired early, no interviews, no statements, no forwarding address, just gone like smoke after fire. It wasn't until recently she realized that his name had quietly reappeared, not in press releases or corporate meetings, but on a single envelope left behind on a bus for her. Later that week, she made another call, this time to an old contact at City Records, someone her father used to know back in his days with the Veterans Affairs Office. I'm looking for anything we have on Martin Whitmore, she said. There was a pause on the other end, then a low whistle. You're digging into a legend, I just want the truth, Angela replied softly. The voice nodded through the phone. Well, here's one thing we never put in the papers. A few years back, Whitmore quietly bought a minority stake in the Chicago Transit Authority. Angela blinked. I'm sorry, he bought what? He used a proxy through a private foundation, but yeah, bought and kept it under the radar, and no one knew. Not until a month ago that foundation began redirecting voting shares, supporting changes to route leadership. You were one of those changes. Angela stared at the wall across her kitchen, the phone still against her ear. He never wanted recognition, the man continued, he just wanted it in the hands of someone who gave a damn. She nodded slowly. I didn't give him much, just respect. That's more than most. Angela walked differently after that, not with arrogance, not with pride, but with something steadier. She wasn't just driving a route anymore, she was carrying a legacy, one that had nearly been buried in silence. Now it lived again, reborn not in headlines but in a teacup, in a mirror check, in a seat that was never truly empty. Seat 21. As spring came slowly to the west side, patches of green pushed up through the frost-bitten soil. The buses ran on time mostly. Angela took to checking in on drivers at shift change, slipping into Bay 6 at odd hours, making sure the new hires understood that the back of a bus could hold more than luggage and feet. Sometimes it held stories, sometimes it held pain. One night late April, rain returned, a slow drizzle that made the sidewalk shine like mirrors. Angela finished her shift paperwork, then walked to Bay 6. Bus number 872 was resting quietly. She stepped inside, checked the log, turned off the dome light, then paused by the back row. Seat 21 looked the same, maybe a little more worn, maybe a little more sacred. She reached into her coat pocket and set down a paper cup of hot tea on seat 20. As steam drifted upward just like always. Then she turned, paused, and blinked. There, standing just outside the bus doors, was a child, maybe 7, maybe 8, wearing a too large army jacket that nearly swallowed his frame, a knit cap tugged down over his ears, olive green, military surplus style. Angela stepped forward and opened the door. The boy looked up, eyes wide, but calm. Can I ride? Angela hesitated for half a beat. There were no scheduled pickups at this hour, no route out, no reason, but she just nodded. Sure. The boy climbed up slow and steady, didn't speak again, just walked to the back, past every open seat, stopped at 21, and sat down. Angela stood near the front, watching him in the mirror. He didn't fidget, didn't reach for a phone or earbuds, he just sat like he belonged. She took a breath, turned off the ignition, and grabbed her spare cup from the storage hatch. She poured the tea, same blend, same weight in her palm, and walked down the aisle. When she reached him, she offered it wordlessly. The boy looked up at her, took it gently, held it like it meant something, and nodded. Angela smiled just a little, then turned around, walked back to the front, and sat in the driver's seat. They sat there in silence, rain ticking on the roof like fingers on an old piano. No movement, no rush, just being. She never asked who he was, never needed to know where he came from, or why he chose that seat. Sometimes you just feel it, a rhythm, a connection, a circle quietly closing. She let the moment breathe, then started the engine, let it hum in low vibration beneath her hands, and whispered more to herself than to anyone, we all come back to where we started, even if it takes a lifetime. The next morning, sunlight broke through gray clouds. Angela found an envelope taped to the inside of her locker. No name, just a pressed wax seal. Inside, another letter, typed this time. Angela, he passed quietly last night in his sleep. The nurses said he had no pain, just faded, but before he did, he asked us to send you this. He called you the one who kept the wheels turning right. Thank you for giving him back the line he once loved, even if only for a few miles. Enclosed is a key to the small storage unit he kept downtown. Inside you'll find journals, maps, letters, memories. They're yours now if you want them, no obligation, but maybe it's time someone else tells the story. With Gratitude, the Whitmore Foundation. Angela sat there long after the letter folded back shut, a key in her palm, small, cold, silent, but in her chest, something warm bloomed, not pride, not sorrow, just a quiet certainty. Some routes don't end, they loop back in another seat, another voice, another day. She placed the key beside the dog tag on her nightstand, pinned the letter near her window, and the next morning, when she climbed onto bus number 872 for one last review, she walked to the back row, sat down in seat 21, and watched the city wake up through foggy glass. Sometimes the ones who whisper the least leave the loudest echoes, and sometimes the legacy we inherit starts with a ride and ends with a cup of tea. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition, some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.